Before the highways, before the tech giants, and before the gold rush carved up the landscape, California was a different world. It was an American Serengeti. Historical records tell us that the Tule elk once moved across the Central Valley in herds so massive they darkened the horizon. Indigenous peoples lived in balance with them for thousands of years. Early explorers counted them by the thousands, 500,000 animals, bugling across the wetlands, masters of a domain stretching from Sacramento to the Tehachapi Mountains. But in the blink of an historical eye, that world vanished. The gold rush brought a tidal wave of humanity. Miners needed meat, leather markets needed hides, and farmers needed the land. The marshes were drained, the fences went up. By 1870, the valley had fallen silent. The great herds were gone. For 4 years, California held its breath. The Tule elk were officially declared extinct. A species that had ruled the landscape for millennia wiped out in less than a single human lifetime. Or so we thought. 1874, the southern San Joaquin Valley. Workers employed by cattle baron Henry Miller are draining the Buena Vista Marsh. They are turning wet ground into grazing land, destroying the last wild refuges acre by acre. Game warden A.C. Tibbett is inspecting the site when he sees movement deep in the reeds. He freezes. Hidden in the thicket isn't a cow or a deer. It's a pair of Tule elk, a male and a female, the last Adam and Eve of a lost species. This is the moment where history hangs in the balance. Most ranchers of the era viewed elk as pests, competition for cattle forage to be shot on sight. But Henry Miller was different. He was a ruthless businessman who controlled over 1 million acres, yet when faced with the last survivors of a species he helped displace, he made a stunning choice. Let them be. Miller ordered his cowboys to guard the elk with their lives. He banned hunting on his land. He became the accidental warden of the entire species. By 1895, that single pair had grown to a herd of 28 animals. Just 28 animals. It was a victory, but a fragile one. Every Tule elk alive today, every single one, traces its bloodline back to this tiny group. This is what biologists call a genetic bottleneck. The species had survived the bullet. Now they had to survive their own DNA. By the early 20th century, the Miller herd was growing. But success brought conflict. The elk were eating crops and smashing fences. Miller's estate wanted them moved. Between 1914 and 1930, biologists attempted 21 different relocations. They tried to move the elk to new homes. All 21 attempts failed. The elk died in transport. They starved. They were poached. It seemed the Tule elk were destined to be a museum piece, capable of surviving only in a zoo-like state, forever dependent on human charity. Then came the desperate gamble of 1933. A rancher named Walter Dow moved a small group to the Owens Valley, east of the Sierra Nevada. It made no sense. This was high desert, dry, rocky, exposed. It was the polar opposite of the lush marshes the elk were named for. Biologists expected them to wither away. But nature surprised them. The elk didn't just survive, they thrived. It turned out we had underestimated them. They weren't just swamp animals, they were survivors. Yet by the 1960s, the total population was still stuck below 500 animals, isolated in just 3 herds. One disease, one wildfire, and it would be over. They needed a champion. Enter Beulah Edmonston. She wasn't a scientist or a politician. She was a citizen who refused to accept extinction. In the late 60s, she formed the Committee for the Preservation of Tule elk. The opposition was formidable. Agricultural giants and water districts held the power. They argued there was simply no room in modern California for wild elk. Restoring them meant lost revenue. Edmonston fought them for 10 years. Her persistence cracked the stone. In 1971, California passed the Bear Bill. It was revolutionary legislation. It didn't just protect the elk, it mandated their recovery. It shifted the burden of proof. Humans now had to prove why elk couldn't be there, rather than elk proving why they should. The federal government followed suit in 1976, opening up military bases and federal lands for the animals. The legal war was won. Now began the Great Experiment. 1978, Point Reyes National Seashore. 10 elk, 2 males, 8 females, are released onto Tamales Point. The expectations were modest. Biologists worried about the soil chemistry. Early signs were grim. For 3 years, reproduction was near zero. Scientists saw copper deficiencies and antler deformities. It looked like another failure in the making. Then, in 1981, the tide turned. Something clicked in the herd's biology. Birth rates exploded. The population doubled, then tripled. By 1998, over 500 elk roamed the windswept peninsula. Across the state, similar miracles occurred. Military bases, oak woodlands, grasslands. The elk were reclaiming their ancestral home. By 2019, the population hit 5,700, from 28 survivors to nearly 6,000. It is one of the greatest conservation comebacks in history. But in the shadow of this triumph, a silent threat remains. You cannot erase the past. The slaughter of the 1800s left a scar written into the very cells of these animals. Modern genetic analysis confirms our fears. Tule elk have shockingly low genetic diversity. In healthy populations, you see variation, different tools to fight disease or adapt to change. In Tule elk, the DNA is dangerously uniform. They are, in many ways, a family of clones. This matters. As the climate warms, California is changing. Droughts are longer, wildfires are hotter, new diseases are emerging. A population with high diversity has options. A population like this, they are vulnerable. One novel virus could do what the hunters of the 19th century failed to do. And then there is the conflict of space. At Point Reyes, elk compete with cattle for grass and water. They are fenced in, unable to migrate during droughts. In 2020, dozens died from thirst and malnutrition, sparking a fierce debate. Are we conserving a wild species, or are we managing an open-air zoo? The Tule elk is a paradox. They are a symbol of resilience, proving that nature can heal if we just stop the bleeding. They have transformed the landscape, restoring grasslands and bringing diversity back to the soil. But they are also a warning. We brought them back from the edge, but we left them fragile. The question for the next century isn't just about numbers, it's about coexistence. Can a state of 40 million people find room for the ghosts of its past? Henry Miller made a choice in 1874. Now that choice belongs to us.